Perhaps the most significant addition in HTML1 were image tags. Now, the way that they worked and what they could actually do at the time is a little different from now, especially with the capabilities of computers and transfer speeds and everything else. So let's look a little bit at that for just a moment. Here's Tim Berners-Lee. This is on the World Wide Web Foundation. I'm going to use this image just as an example. So I'm going to go ahead and just capture it. Alright, so let's say that I want to use this image on my web page, right? So how would I do that? So I'm going to go ahead and just call it Tim, or TBL, Tim Berners-Lee. And first off, this is a .png file because that's the standard that Mac screenshots things in. So it needs to be a JPEG because at the time only JPEGs and GIFs were supported in majority of browsers. The next thing is the color range and the size. Well, size in two different ways, partially in the dimensions of the image, but also in the actual file size. So this is 893 kilobytes. That's almost a megabyte. That would have taken forever to transfer back then. So I'm going to open this into Photoshop just to make some changes. So first off, the maximum screen size at the time for many machines was 640 by 480. So the biggest this could be, well, I mean, I guess it could be bigger, but let's go ahead and stick to that. So 640 by 480. Alright, so with 640, the height is below 480, so I'm okay with that. So I'm going to hit OK. We're quite a bit smaller. That's not too bad, really, but that's about as big as a lot of the screen sizes were. Now, the issue comes in when we actually save for web. So at the time, most browsers couldn't support all those colors either. And so this will convert it to JPEG, but that's still not even really accurate because the monitors and the machines back then didn't support all the colors they do now. It would have looked something more along the lines of like this or this, one of these GIF settings. So if you really want to try to make it look closer to the way it actually was, go in here and choose one of these GIF settings, and that will give you a more accurate appearance. Even the 128 is probably too high. You probably need to stick with one of these 32s. So I'm going to go with this one. In addition to having these presets up here, you can also modify it yourself too. So you could switch it down to 8 and see what it looks like that, or 4 or 2, and to really get a feel of how it could have looked on some of the really old screens. But if you were using the web, you probably had at least 8 or maybe 16. Now, because of how bad it could look on some screens, depending on the age of the machine and everything that they were using, it wasn't unusual to see images in black and white. And we can adjust this a little bit to try to make it a little less dark. Maybe something like that. And now if I do save for web, even going into here and dropping down from 32 to like 16 or 8, it doesn't, well, 8's pretty bad. But going to 16, it doesn't look as bad because we're not dealing with color data, we're only dealing with value. So a lot of early websites had things in black and white. So I'll go ahead and save that. So that's tbl.gif. I'll leave it on my desktop. If I want to, I could reopen that. So here that is. Gonna reopen it in Photoshop. Now it's this kind of icky pixelated thing with only a few colors. But if I go to save for web for one more time, I can look at the file size. GIF is 42 versus JPEG is 34. So even though it has that GIF look to it, I'm going to convert it to a JPEG anyway. So that way it is a little bit lower in file size, because that also mattered because transfer speeds were low. Now I could have just done a JPEG from the previous one, but that wouldn't have given it this sort of like retro feel to it. Now you don't necessarily have to do that, I suppose, if you don't want to, but if you're talking about designing using old code and looking at some of this older stuff, I think it's more authentic to try to use those same restrictions in size and colors and dimensions as well. So I'm going to go in here and open this with text edit. And if I want to add this in, that's pretty easy to do. Inside of the body here, I can decide where I want it to go. So maybe below the hello world. So img src, so that's image and source, and then equals whatever the name of the file is. So that was Tim Berners-Lee, right? And that was a .jpeg file. This file is on the desktop. It's going to look on the desktop for it, and since it's on the desktop, it will find it. So I'll save, and I'll close, and I'll open this with Safari. And there we go. We sort of get an idea of what it looks like. Now keep in mind, I mentioned that the browser size wasn't very big, right? So I made this at 640, that maximum size that some browsers were at the time. So if I zoom in a bit, this is a little bit more what it would have looked like. Of course, my Hello World ASCII art is a little too big, so I should probably scale that down a bit, figure out how to fix that. But there you go, that's adding images in, and that's sort of what it would have looked like back then. Not very crisp, not very sharp, not very many colors, but it is what it is.